Give me most probabilistic tokens.
Early days, early days.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 205. Today we'll be talking Hackaday Berlin, so many sundials, and ovens pinging Google. In the news this week, we'll talk Hackaday news, the announcement that we're going to be having a big party March 25th in Berlin.
Very exciting for friends across the pond. Well, side of the pond you're on anyway, right?
Yeah, come on over to my side of the pond. No, it's going to be really fun. We have got a fairly big hackerspace, makerspace, co-working space up there reserved. We're still working on getting the venue for the Friday night pre-party, but we've got space for about 300 people. We'll have talks all day Saturday, and between invited longer talks and lightning talks. And I'm super excited actually to have lightning talks. Are always so much fun. Well, for one, they're really hard to give. It's hard to condense like a lot of work into a 7-minute talk, but everybody does that. And so then the lightning talks are just like rapid fire, good ideas, one after the other. And I do love that.
The return of Voya's incredible badge.
Voya's badge has gotten a bit of a facelift. It's not exactly the same badge. I've seen preprint Gerbers / silkscreen of it. It looks pretty sweet.
Gotta collect them all. Like
exactly. It's by and large the same. All the good stuff is still there.
That actually kind of, I'm excited to see that because we saw so much awesome software developed for the badge at SuperCon, and also tools too. So, I mean, if you're getting your hands on it for the first time now, you do have a considerable leg up in terms of like example code and development stuff than the SuperCon attendees. Naturally, I expect the state of the art to be even higher after.
Yeah,
Berlin.
but I kind of hope that people also step back and take it back to basics, because I really did think that some of the fun of that badge was just sitting there and, as dumb as it sounds, keying numbers in binary in, registering the commands in one at a time. It did have that, it has that real connection.
It's like it says right on the back, right? What is it, Eve? Programmer who's never done ones and zeros on bare metal has never felt the grass on his
exactly.
feet. Some crazy quote on the back of there, but it's true. I mean, I think that the first thing you do on it should definitely be enter in some stuff in binary and say, oh wow, that's how this works.
Yeah.
And then realize that the computer or phone you have does the exact same thing, just a billion times faster.
Now, we had some people who actually stuck to that, stuck to the keyboard entry only as their personal challenge during SuperCon, and I thought that was pretty cool. Kenneth Finnegan insisted that he wasn't even going to read the instructions, and he was just going to do it just from the documentation of the opcodes on the front and the back.
But I think that speaks to how well it was all designed, that there's, enough documentation on the thing, and it's straightforward enough that you could pick it up and be like, okay, and, actually program it.
Anyway, for those of you who are going to be there, it's going to be a big party. It's a one-day event only, but it's a one-day event with a party before and a long brunch the day after. So is that really a one-day event? I don't know. But it's one day of talk tracks and then another day of just kind of chilling out, badge hacking, random show and tell. I think we should totally do like a bring a hack themed brunch. So if you have something you want to show off to people, definitely Sunday morning is going to be your time to shine, in case you don't want to hit up one of the lightning talks, of course. So we haven't even announced the speakers yet, and the early bird tickets are already sold out. But still, it's absolutely worth your while at the full price. We have a pre-party. We have a day full of talks, of course, full catered the whole way along, and then brunch the next day. Anyway, head on over to Hackaday / come join us for Hackaday Berlin, and or over at the Eventbrite link you'll find therein. Click yes, get yourself a ticket, and make plans to be up in Berlin the weekend of March 25th.
Did you say Hackaday / come join us at Berlin? Is that really
what is it? It's going to be by the time. Whatever I said, we'll make it a link. Come join us for Hackaday Berlin. Will that work?
I mean, sure, if they'll remember it. For Hackaday.
Come join us for Hackaday Berlin. Yeah, see, it works.
Boom.
It actually
Boom, done.
does work. Hackaday / come join us for Hackaday Berlin works. Thanks, WordPress.
There you go.
That's the worst link ever.
Yeah, put some symbols in there
To
too.
make it
Really.
more confusing. Exclamation point.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get
All
on to
right.
what's that sound before we expire.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
So that brings us to What's That Sound? This week is a sound challenge week.
I always get stuck
Dan
on the
was
sound
sick
one.
one week, so you got 2 sound challenges in a row. Sorry about that, man. Do your best.
Let me see.
You might get this one. I wouldn't have gotten this one.
This game's become harder because because now that we've involved video games and like multimedia, it's always hard to say, is it as straightforward as, a siren in the rain? It must be from something.
It's a particular one.
I don't know, but I'll say, I don't know, maybe Half-Life or something.
This was actually an idea of Christina's. She said, hey, why don't you do... It's definitely a siren, but the question is, which siren?
Like in the real world siren?
Yeah.
Foreign siren. British police siren.
If you out there have a guess, write us in hackaday.com/podcast, and you have a chance to win a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. All right, well, let's get down to the hacks. This week, I want to start off with Sundial Collection is 2D printed. You heard that right. This is actually a project that is not 3D printed, but actually printed out on paper printers. This is a collection of, as far as I can tell, every possible sundial. I think 21 different kinds of sundials, all in all of them printable out on paper. You're going to have to do some light arts and crafts, like glue stuff to cardboard and... stick in straws to make the gnomon, the little pokey-uppy thing that casts the shadow. But this is an awesome collection of projects because it goes from the stupid, simplest possible sundial, the equatorial sundial, which is the one where you have to figure out what your latitude is on the Earth and you angle it up. And then there's all the other variants on this. So he's got the nice flat equatorials. He's got equatorial ring ones. He's got funny versions of those where they're printed up like squares and stars and stuff. But then he's got also some of the really more complicated ones, the ones that tell you accurately what time it is, independent of what season it is. And that's where things start to get really interesting with sundials. The craziest thing about sundials is that relative to kind of clock time, consistent clock time, they get either ahead or behind by about 15 minutes over the course of the year, periodically. Like it's a normal function. And this function of how sundials lag or lead clock time is actually called, and this is my favorite thing in the world because it's like almost sci-fi, the equation of time.
Ooh.
It's not the equation of time like that. It's like making the times equal is what it means. And the funniest thing, of course, historically, is that sundials used to be the primary clocks. And the equation of time was what people did when they noticed that their regular clocks were running too regularly and didn't match the sundials. And so the equation of time used to be what you'd add or subtract to a working mechanical clock to make it match up to the sundial. And of course, nowadays, we live with real clocks. And nowadays, we make our sundials match up to real clocks. Anyway, a bunch of these sundials also do the equation of time stuff. I guess I think that's cool because there's a lot of astronomy in it. The reason sundial clocks don't keep consistent time is because the Earth is both tilted on its axis and its orbit isn't a perfect circle. And so the orbit's an ellipse, which means the Earth is going by faster or slower sometimes. And If you think about it, over the course of a day, Earth has turned around, rotated around its axis, but then it's also moved around in its orbit around the sun. So the sun is like losing a little bit every day. The sun is in a different place, on the next sunrise than when it was on the previous sunrise. And because of this, the speed that the Earth is traveling matters. And so the sun time loses or gains time relative to clock time, depending on how fast the Earth is going, but also on what season it is. So because the Earth is tilted, like the sun kind of goes up in the north in the winter and it goes down in the south in the summer, if you think about how the sun travels overhead. And that means that it's got a periodic north-south travel component as well as its normal east-west travel component. And that means that the sun actually goes across the sky at different speeds depending on what time of year it is as well. And so these two factors combine together to make sundial clocks really crazy relative to clocks. And the way to fix this up is this so-called equation of time. And this sundial collection has a bunch of equation of time corrected sundials in it. So you can actually tell what the clock time is depending on what the season is. And it's actually got my favorite one of all. It's sometime in 1922, Hugo Michnik came up with a new sundial. Can you imagine? Like sundials are, thousands of years old, and somebody came up with a new sundial in 1922?
I got an idea.
Which is the bifilar sundial kit, which has got two wires that are perpendicular to each other, but they don't cross. One is lifted up above the other one. And the intersection of these gives you a different dot depending on how high the sun is in the sky and what time it is. And so he's actually figured out the right heights to make all this go so that it does the equation of time and the spot moves around at a constant speed. So you have straight lines and it corrects to clock time on the wall. It's a little bit of a brain twister, that one. Anyway, that's also here. So, my God, 21 sundials. How could you possibly want more?
It does not surprise me in the least to find that you are a sundial aficionado. For some reason, that makes total sense to me, right? Yeah, this is incredible. I had no idea there were so many types of sundials, and I found myself scrolling through this and just how many more could there possibly be? There are a lot, and some of them are just wild in the extreme. When I saw it literally says the Star of David sundial, I thought that was a joke or something, but no, he says this is
why not?
This is a real thing. It's not like a Mel Brooks creation or anything. It's and then he said if you're above the Arctic Circle, it would tell time on all sides because it's, I guess, constantly illuminated and stuff. Not that,
yeah,
I'm likely to be in the Arctic Circle and need to, I'm in the Arctic Circle, I have paper, I have a printer, but I don't know what time it is. One of the ones I thought was really cool, a lot of them are really cool, but the CD one is, talk about a modern take on the sundial.
Right?
The one that uses the CD and then has the a little rainbow diffraction thing that literally points like a hand. I thought that was pretty cool. I might actually have to find a CD somewhere. He puts on there. He goes, "Oh, finding a CD shouldn't be hard." But
yeah, maybe.
I don't know. For some of us, maybe I don't know.
Make your sundials quick before all the CDs are gone.
Yeah, right. But that one says invented in '99. So, like you said, you think it's thousands of years old technology, but once in a while somebody comes up with a new idea. There's a digital one too, which I thought was really cool. I'm sure we covered the 3D printed digital sundial back when it came out.
Links in the show notes.
There you go. It's like the same concept, except the numbers are cut out in the paper. I have to imagine you got to have a machine or something like a Cricut, because there's I'm looking at the numbers and if you do this by hand, I don't know.
X-Acto knife.
There's the one that's cut out of paper. Okay, fine. Maybe you need help. But the other two he has are printed on transparency, which I think is really cool. So you can just put transparent sheet in the printer, print that, and then the light projects the number. So that's a cool one too. These are a lot of awesome ones if we're trying to show kids. I think it'd be great for a classroom. So many of them, they're cheap to make and you don't need any kind of crazy stuff, and you could keep kids occupied all day with all these different sundials.
I've actually got my own secret sundial design that I think has never been done, although it's super closely related to one of the ones in this list. I'm going to have to actually make it, put my money where my mouth is, and make one for y'all. I'll have that out by the vernal equinox.
There you go.
That's a good deadline for making a sundial, right?
If you're gonna have a sundial battle, do you have to meet at high noon, like in the Wild West?
Yeah, but high noon on a clock or high solar noon?
Yeah, right. Well, from matters of two-dimensional printing to the third story I was really interested in this week is the effect of filament color on print strength and more. I know I talked about one of the other episodes. I have like my favorite colors, and not because of any artistic reason. I just think some colors seem to work better. And I don't know if it's like a placebo thing going on or they're, what the deal is. But I think a lot of people probably have similar preferences, right? And this attempt by CNC Kitchen was to see, is there some real numbers behind this? Are there colors that are better? Should we be picking a particular color, or does it not matter? If you're looking for like what's the best color, unfortunately there is no one best color, but there definitely are differences. And in the video, it kind of makes the case that it might be worth tailoring your color to your application. So there's stuff like, for example, the layer adhesion on red seemed to be always higher across the board, but other colors had better tensile strength. So depending on what you think your failure mode might be,
right,
it might be worth looking at this kind of data. The kind of tricky part is that the traits aren't always, sometimes they're at the odds with each other. It might be stronger in one category and weaker in the other. So that's, it prevents one clear winner from being crowned. Even in the comments, we always say that the comments have some of the best insight on Hackaday. You have people in there saying, "Oh yeah, I only use gray because gray is the only thing that sticks to my bed." And then somebody's like, "No, only red sticks to my bed." So there's so much variability in here. I think the answer probably is just get a bunch of colors and spend an afternoon printing them all. Print the same design. That's very important, and just see what works best. Because as much as we'd like 3D printing to be, well, more like 2D printing, right? Like you push a button and it always comes out. There is so much variability. I tell people too, it even depends like how warm the room is that you're in. I know once it gets past a certain temperature, I have a hell of a time getting the prints to stick to the bed, so there's just so many variables. And of course now we have another one added by the color that you're printing in.
I remember a few months back we were talking about 3D printing and how we both hate white filament. And like the article was about, maybe it abrades your nozzle faster or not because it has bigger, I don't know, somebody got a sample with bigger colorant particles in it or whatever. But it was funny because we both have noticed that we've had like bad luck with white, and I have some blue and some red PETG that print essentially identically, and then I got a yellow from the same manufacturer and it was just horrible and like it was brittle. So who the heck knows? I'm glad he did some science in this, but on the other hand, I don't know what more we can take home from this except that filaments he tested were all different from each other, and at least he documented that well. So it's not just me being crazy that I think that yellow is different from blue, but at the same time, if he found that his red had better layer adhesion, does it mean that my red's going to have better layer adhesion?
Yeah, exactly.
I doubt it, actually. So I don't know really how to apply this, except, like you said, just buy a whole bunch of filaments, test them all out, see what you like for what.
It's funny you mentioned with the PETG in different colors. I had a similar thing. I was working on some parts and I ran out of filament, and Amazon, the fastest they could get me was a pink PETG, and I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll get that for now, whatever. And I started printing with it. It was great, and then when the yellow I wanted finally came in, I couldn't get the same surface finish, and I was like I'm cursed to use this hot pink filament. And so I have not that that ended up being the least of my problems in finishing it, but I have an ROV I've been working on off and on for like the last year or two, has one pink thruster that looks beautiful.
Oh, that's super.
And the yellow parts don't look quite as good.
That'll help you with orientation if you're like, you're having trouble seeing it at the bottom of the lake. You'll know that the pink thruster's on the left side always, right? You'll be able to tell which way it's going. That's a feature. It's a feature.
Very nautical themed.
My next hack, reliving a bitmapped past with a veritable horde of bitmap fonts, from Rob Hagemans. is exactly that. It is a horde of bitmap font from, Acorn and Amiga through OS2 through every version of Windows. It's got the fonts from Windows 1.0 all the way up to 3.1. It's got the fonts from Amstrad, from the Apple Mac, from the Lisa. My first computer ever was the TRS-80 color computer, and it had that font. And it is strangely nostalgic to see a font you haven't seen in 20 years or so. I mean, I don't know when the last time I actually had a physical Coco in front of me was, but I haven't even thought about that thing in ages. And just seeing the font, it's like, how can all of the fonts from the mid-80s computers be different from each other, but yet they are? Anyway, this is just a superb collection, and I think that the whole nostalgia trip here is actually the wrong path to go down, because bitmapped fonts are actually just plain and simple useful. If you have a low resolution display, like, one of those little OLED screens, or, you've built something out of LEDs and you want to display words on it, there's no sense in you trying to reinvent the fonts yourself. Here is a whole collection of every possible font in every possible style that you could be interested in. And actually, Rob has given us a really cool viewer application here. And so you can look at all of the different fonts and test them all out and see which ones work for you and which ones don't. What their resolution is and, whether they have the funny glyphs you need or not.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually that's the same thing I thought when I read this. It's presented as like a preservation thing, which, is important in its own way, right? But I think we see a lot of bitmap fonts and a lot of the projects that come across us. I know I've had to, do similar stuff or make little icons using the same kind of techniques. And like you said, why reinvent the wheel? If you're using like one of those little character LCDs or something, like this is what you're going to be looking at.
This is a lot of typing in, binary representations of dots that you're not going to have to type in. It's already been done for you. If you've got more dots than like a 5x8 LED array, some of the old OS2 fonts are particularly beautiful. Some of the Apple Mac fonts, of course, are iconic, although looking back at one of them that seems to be called Los Angeles, it's kind of almost handwritten-y. I think that almost has the same potential to be abused as Comic Sans did. Some of the old Apple Lisa fonts are awesome. Amstrad Data fonts has that like printed on a check kind of appearance to it. It's got the really kind of retro futuristic looking font, Amstrad Data font. Check that one out. It's just a really neat collection. And he's also got this tool called Monobit, which allows you to change these fonts into basically any format you want. He saves them all in his own particular font format, YAFF, which must stand for yet another font format. But it's really beautiful. It's kind of ASCII readable, so you can create the font characters in if you have a monospace font on your computer, you can create the characters by just putting like the stars and the dashes in the right shape, and it basically reads over, and then you can feed those into his Monobit program, which will then turn them into whatever format you want. Whether it's for retro nostalgia purposes or just you don't have that many pixels, there's going to be something here for you.
Well, in a pretty good transition that I didn't even plan, we go from retro computing fonts to a retro computer, or at least a replica of one. This is the latest Triumph from Michael Gardi. He does incredible work in bringing these old computers back to life. And, we're talking about computers that you'll never see. Maybe they only made 8 of them, and there's 3 pictures of him.
Yeah.
And the rest is his work. I mean, he really digs deep and comes up with these phenomenal pieces of history and recreates them in a way that the admittedly very committed individual could do on their own. Like these aren't necessarily easy builds, but they're worth the effort. One of the things I like about his approach is that he's very big on the visuals and like the feel of it, but then not super concerned about like the back end. Like these are all usually some kind of emulator running on a Raspberry Pi. Like he's not worried about like it being chip accurate or something. But from the outside, if you put this thing next to what it's supposed to be, I mean, it's incredible. The visual detail he'll go to make it look like it's supposed to. To a degree, that's the important thing, right? If you're trying to preserve what it was like to use these machines, the experience of actually typing on them and loading stuff from tape, it isn't super necessary that there's not a Raspberry Pi behind the scenes. It's more, it's more about the look and the feel, and that's where he puts the effort. In this case, this is a MCM 70E. Sure. It's some Canadian microcomputer with a little what was it in the real one? Is it a dot matrix display on the real one, or is it a plasma display or something? He's using
a crazy plasma display on the real one.
Yeah, plasma display and dual cassette tape. I mean, I think when Christina wrote the article about it, she's called it like, the original Cyberdeck or something.
Yeah.
'Cause it looks like something somebody would come up with. If you ask like an AI thing to come up with a weird old computer, like, I got you. Here it is. You want one tape deck or two?
It's got two tape decks.
Yeah, of course. But like the case here is a combination of woodworking and 3D printed. Like he's got like a wooden frame with 3D printed panels on it. The keyboard, he went to great lengths to make sure like the keycaps looked accurate and it's the right layout. It's not just, you just like slap some little mechanical keyboard in there. It looks exactly like it's supposed
that's
to.
Outrageous.
The tapes are not, the tapes are really cool. Again, like he's not concerned with like waiting for stuff to load off tape. Like that's not, or that there's actually tape in it. So he has like 3D printed cassettes with magnets in them, and then there's like an array of magnetic sensors. Actually, it certainly wouldn't be the way I would do it, which is not not speaking down on it. It's just a very interesting thought process he had here. So like there's an array of magnets inside this 3D printed cassette, and then the sensors pick them up, and then like based on how many sensors have been triggered, that's what it knows what I mean. I probably would have reached for like an NFC thing, something off the shelf, but he spun up his whole own solution that just by the combination of which magnetic sensors pop off, it knows which tape you put in there, and then like the emulator loads the whatever code it is, so you get that feel of opening it up, putting the tape in there, but without having to actually wait for it to wind its way out. Every one of his builds is phenomenal, and definitely if you're into this kind of thing, I would highly recommend just going on his Hackaday IO page. He does phenomenal documentation.
Yeah.
We had him for a hack chat one time, which was fascinating. He's really been just a pleasure to have in the community. And I think the first time we ran across him when he was recreating, they're like old, like in the 60s, they were like the pre, they were talking about like computer concepts before you could actually have a computer. They were showing like how ands and ors would work, but using marbles or something crazy. He was recreating stuff like that.
And yeah.
So he's been working his way kind of up through time and the complexity factor, and it's just been amazing to see the progress. I forget which computer it was, but he needed these like big thunky flat switches, and like he couldn't find them or they were too much money. So he spent an incredible amount of time designing how to recreate them with 3D printed toggles and magnets and like read sensors, and then spun that off into like its own project. So he's like, I built this for this computer, but if you want big funky tactile thunk switches for whatever, here's all the files and you can do it. So it's really cool to see how there's been these spin-off, like that panel mount LED you're talking about, and the switches, like there's been benefit to the larger community, and he's always very cool about putting that stuff out there and helping others who might be on similar projects.
All right, my last hack this week is Arduino does SDI video with FPGA help by Chris Brown, and I learned about SDI video while reading this project, and you can too. SDI is the kind of professional equivalent of HDMI video. It's just a super high speed, as the name suggests, serial digital interface to get video across, and it's apparently used in a bunch of high-end applications. Usually machines to make test signals and whatever else for SDI are super expensive. He manages to do it here for only kind of expensive. And the way he does it is by building it himself. At the heart of all of this is an Arduino in big air quotes. It's not the Arduino that you and apparently some people in the comments were thinking of. Everybody thought that they wanted to see an AVR, but a while back, 2-3 years ago, Arduino put out the Arduino MKR Maker series of FPGA based Arduino boards. And this one uses the Vidor 4000. And I don't think we've seen more than one or two other projects ever use these boards, and that's because I think this is it's like an $80 board, but also because the hurdles in doing this FPGA programming are hard enough and kind of a mismatch for what we normally think of as like the Arduino crowd. On the other hand, the Vidor 4000 has the Intel Cyclone 10, and that's what's doing the real kind of pixel pushing work here. And even that's not fast enough. The trick with SDI is that it's literally putting out every pixel. 8 bits of data plus a little padding, 10 bits of data per pixel times whatever you get at 1080p times 30 frames a second ends up being, kind of 1.5 gigabits of data per second he has to put out with this thing. Even the FPGA on board can only put out 200 megahertz, so he has to enroll the help of a serializer chip. And that seems to be the way to go with SDI. Again, never played with it, but it needs a buffer chip, and then it needs to output just kind of such high frequency data that you're going to need a dedicated hardware peripheral for it. This one is a Semtech part. I went looking. This chip alone is a $30 chip. But what it does is it takes in parallel data and sends out really damn high speed serial data.
The product is interesting itself. Like you, I hadn't heard about SDI, so it's kind of cool to see that. But for me, I thought the interesting thing was when I started looking more into it, like this air quotes Arduino is like the story of this board is really kind of amazing how far it goes back in like the history of Hackaday, and that we're finally getting to see people do stuff with it. I think we first announced in like 2018, and then did a hands-on at Maker Faire, like Bay Area Maker Faire, and then Al himself, who wrote this daily, did a whole review of it in summer of 2018, and he kind of goes through it all. So it's cool to see this finally come full circle and get used, in this project, only to then be, dismissed as not a true Arduino because it wasn't an 8-bit chip. But it's one of those cool things I really like when we cover these new parts. It's not always super clear if we'll see them again, right? Like, or in what form. So I like that when we write about these new developments that they end up getting used and hacked down the line. It's not just something that gets stuck in industry and we never get to see it again. Yeah, Al knew. He knew it was up because he wrote the review for the thing.
But he actually had one on his bench and actually did a hands-on and tried programming it with their environment and stuff like that. Like, that's a cool review. I'm throwing the links in the show notes for the rest of you out there.
He probably jumped right on this. He was like, "Oh, finally!"
Exactly.
I've been waiting, 5-6 years for somebody to use this thing in a project. Well, this one here, I picked because I'm a bit of a gamer when I have time, which is less and less as I get older and have children. But this is using ChatGPT, everyone's favorite AI assistant, to make the conversation with NPCs, non-player characters, more natural in video games. And in this case, it's used in the game Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, which I am familiar with. I'm not.
Are you actually?
I've never played it, but I knew about it as soon as I saw the thing. I was like, "Oh yeah, Mountain Blade 2." I know people who are into it. I'll put it that way.
All right.
It's one of these conquer the world kind of thing, medieval times or what have you. And, usually, like most games, it has the dialogue tree where guy says 2 things to you, you pick one, and then you have 2 more choices, and you work your way through it. That's like how every game basically has been. Even the, super modern RPGs have sort of the same, branching tree. This replaces that with AI. And the cool thing in the demo video is, he's riding his horse as you do in medieval times. And like a villager like runs up to him, and all right. So I should say, if you're gonna watch the video, you're gonna find out pretty quick. The downside is that talking to Chat GPT is very slow right now. When the villagers talk to you, there's this really awkward loading thing, which is a dot 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 dot. And I mean, good on him, Block, who made this. Good on him for not cutting it out. So like, you're getting the real deal here. But it is like hilarious how long it takes for this dude to say something to him as he just walks. He looks up to him on his horse and just staring at him for like 30 seconds. But anyway, when he finally starts talking, he comes up with his own like quest for the player that is, not scripted. He says, "Oh, there's bandits killing our chickens or something. If you take care of them, I'll give you X amount of gold." And that's like a thing that it came up with. That wasn't a scripted event, So like, cool. Right off the bat, you can see how that would make for a much more interesting gameplay, because you could be hit with these random things. But then rather than having like a yes or no prompt, he's actually replaced that with a text input field. And so he says, "Well, it's not my problem," or whatever. "I don't really care." And then like there's another 20 seconds, dot, dot, dot. And then he's like, "Oh, yes, but we're just little villagers and you're so strong and powerful." Like, and he has a real conversation. It's not just yes, no, maybe, have a nice day. And, obviously this is in its infancy, and it wouldn't really work because nobody's going to sit there and wait for 30 seconds for this guy to tell you he's going to give you gold or whatever. But I really think that there's potential here, and especially as our computers, the local machine gets more and more powerful. Even the consoles are ridiculously powerful now, that some subset, of these like language AIs could run in the game itself and not have to call out to a service that everybody else is, pounding for memes. You start seeing more of this in game,
Yeah, I would think that a purpose-built, Chat GPT-esque, transformer large language model kind of thing could totally work for this. But man, I just watched the video now and I see what you mean. It's like 20 seconds of sitting there waiting for the dude to say something to you. And
he just has this
brutal.
He has like the little idle animation where he's just like moving a little bit, and he's just like, "You got a pee guy? What is it? Like, what are you trying to say?"
It's like when you're on, some kind of instant messenger and the other person is typing and they're like changing their sentence and they're like going back and they're erasing it and you just don't see anything except that damn typing icon, and you're like, "Okay, hurry up and just type it. Just type it. Just type faster.
Just say something." Yeah. But no, I think there's a lot of promise here. And like you said, you could condense it, the language model, because obviously this village peasant isn't going to ask you about, writing a Python script, right?
Yeah,
so he doesn't need to know all the weird stuff that people are using Chat GPT for. It doesn't need all of that. It just needs its own little microcosm of its world, So I think that'd be really cool. And I as someone who's been playing games for a long time, the magic seems to have gone away in a lot of the, like, it just like the games look a little bit better and they load a little bit faster. And maybe the world's bigger, but like there hasn't been a lot of huge changes that I've really seen in gaming. We've kind of plateaued, and even graphically, they sort of look. You'd be hard pressed sometimes to see like what year this game came out. There's games from 2015 that still look as good as stuff coming out now. We're sort of hitting a lot of the limits, at least in terms of like artwork. People have to make this art, right, to throw it around.
Yeah.
But this is actually like for the first time in a while that like something truly unique that I've seen, and I'm very excited about what that could mean for the future of these kind of games.
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be extremely hard to test the gameplay and like to make sure what happens. Like,
yeah,
like if the peasant runs up to you and he's like, "I need a whole bunch of chickens," and there's not any chickens on this level, what are you going to do?
Right. There still needs to be a back end.
They have to write the prompts carefully to make this work. And, if you've seen the games people play with Chat GPT, it's going to be pretty hard to keep it G-rated / non-horrible. I don't know. Christina is a big fan of some of these Twitch bots that have been using GPT. Every last one of them gets banned before I get to see it. So
I know exactly what you mean.
Every last chatbot ends up being a horrible Nazi. So, like, we just have to somehow, I don't know.
My brother just told me about there was some kind of AI-driven Seinfeld monologue thing where it would just keep making up jokes, and it eventually made an offensive joke, and they had to take it down.
Banned.
Yeah, they had to, like this. I think just like yesterday or something, this happened. So yeah, they do eventually just start saying horrible things. But yeah, it's a perfect example because it could easily give you a quest that you can't complete. So there has to be some kind of checks and balances. I mean, it tells you to go go to this castle. It doesn't even exist, and it's like I'm sorry, I made that up. I see in the discussion of these AI things, they call that hallucinations. I don't know. Have you seen that getting thrown around? They'll be like, oh yeah, sometimes ChatGPT hallucinates, and I was like, oh, that's helpful. It's just a hallucination. Well, when you've invested your time and effort into following a hallucination, like that might suck.
Oh, I think all the people who think that it's doing anything other than hallucinating 24/7 are in denial somehow. Like, I think everyone out there who thinks that it knows something is fooling themselves. It's just full-time free associating, and most of the time, because being right is most probabilistically likely, given the data it's been trained on, it's likely to be right. But it's not always. And when you get into those crazy edge cases, it's really super amusing. But we'll see if it makes for a good game. Game AI is kind of, I don't know if it's underappreciated. It certainly is a super important component of the way games play. And it has been since the mid-'80s when they first invented video games. How your opponent, when it was an adversarial one, like, think about Space Invaders. They're just so dumb you can get them every time, right? But then games get along, and then came the wave of games where you're playing with the AI non-player characters, right? And so, like, there's like Half-Life 2, for instance, had a really great system that's way, and that was kind of what made that game fun. So I could totally see this being, the next level, getting some networks in there that are actually smart enough that you can actually really let them free inside the game. I think you're right. That stands to be really cool. I don't think I'm going to wait 30 seconds for a reply from a peasant putting me on a quest to collect chickens, though. My first quick hack this week comes from Jacek Fedorinsky. Old 3D CAD mouse gets new lease on life. Man, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know I love me a good old space mouse. This is a Pico-based project to decode the serial protocol from the really old space mice and turn it into a USB for plugging into your real computer. What I think is really neat about this one is that it's got a nicely worked out example about how you could interact with these things and maybe use one in your own project if just plugging it into your computer isn't interesting enough for you. My next quick hack, create your RTL simulations with KiCad, comes from Bob Alexander. And this is a super simple little script that takes the net list out of KiCad and converts it into Verilog. So if you want to program like an FPGA, for instance, you can make circuits the old school way in KiCad, run it through the script. It takes the network, turns it into Verilog modules, sets all the inputs and outputs up for you. It actually looks like a really fun, handy way to do some of the grunt work to low-level Verilog programming. And last up from Dean Segovis, clock your camera with the shutter speed tester. This is something that used to be really hard with old film cameras to figure out if its exposure is correct by measuring these super small time distances. And it's something that's tremendously simple for a modern microcontroller to do. And he builds a really sweet tester here based on someone else's code, but he ends up kind of elaborating on it in this video. This video ends, as most of Dean's do, with something that I realize that I may have subconsciously, or maybe it's just simultaneous invention. He says, "keep on hacking" at the end of his videos every time. And that was like when Mike put me on the spot for a tagline at the end of the podcast, I just came up with that. And I think I might have been subconsciously inspired by Dean. On the other hand, I have to say, Dean has called his weekly video / posting series Hack a Week.
Damn, I'm trying to think of it. I heard somebody say keep on hacking, run something recently. I mean, it's not exactly the most, original thing in the world for hackers, I suppose. So I guess it's possible that multiple people could arrive at the same conclusion.
I believe that to be the case. I totally didn't rip it off of him on purpose.
It's not like he said keep on cooking or baking or like it's the thing we do. It's the hacking thing. So,
but I've also been watching his videos for 10 years now, and he's probably been reading Hackaday for 18 years. So
yeah,
it's all good. Nothing but respect for Dean. So carry on, man. Keep on hacking.
Well, my first quick hack of the week comes from Dave Jones. This is experimenting with 20 meters of outlet adapters. I picked this one for a couple of reasons. One, as one of the people who is responsible for getting these posts out the door, you sort of get an idea for what's going to be very popular and what's going to maybe be something that goes out at 1 a.m. And I did not think this was going to be as popular as it was. I was really shocked. I think it's almost 100 comments as of the recording here, and there's so much debate about it, and it kind of just goes to show you never really can predict the whims of the internet, right? Dave found 238 little cube outlet adapters in the garbage because, sure. His son and him decided, well, let's hook them all up together in a super long chain and see what happens. And, I think he finds that with a heater plugged in, you lose something like 300 watts throughout this thing, which comes out to, 1-ish, watts per adapter. And then he gets out the thermal camera and sees that they're all pretty even. It's not like one of them in the middle is causing the problem. In the end, he says, they're actually fairly decent, assuming you don't plug in 200 of them in a row. Next up is OG Doob shows off the origin of multi-monitor. It's easy to forget that what we look at now as this super simple game was, when it came out in 93, like a genre-defining release. There's a reason that we're still talking about it now. And one of the reasons is because it did push the envelope in a lot of these technical aspects. And this video from Tech Tangents explores the little-known multi-monitor support in Doom, which at the time meant you needed a computer for every display. And it's totally impractical, and there's a reason that you never did this in 93, and you never knew anybody who did this in 93, but it is really cool to see some of these capabilities in what we traditionally think of as antique software, that it really was breaking a lot of ground and has rightfully earned its place in history. And last quick hack for me is SDR Scanner listens to everything. As Al Williams explains in the beginning of this one, like the old school scanner that you're probably used to, it sits there for a little bit spinning around in the channels. It hears something that breaks through the noise floor and you listen to it, and then round and round it goes. That's not necessarily the case for, if you have a software-defined radio like these, cheap RTL SDRs that we all have on our part bin. They can, keep track of a much larger chunk of the spectrum at the same time. So this is a video from Tech Minds that's about an open source project that allows you to set up some of these SDRs, have them capture large swaths of the spectrum, and then afterwards you can see all the recordings that it made on this really nice web-based interface where each one is its own little playable MP3. It's very cool. It the video kind of goes into the setup of it, so if you're looking for sort of a tutorial, that might be helpful there. But it also reminded me, we've seen projects in the past where there's talk about trying to record the whole RF spectrum for historical purposes, because someday in the future, when broadcast radio is no longer a thing, they might want to say, hey, what did it sound like in the FM bands in 2023? So it's kind of a similar project that you could do at home with your own hardware for perhaps your own RF library.
All right, now it is time for Can't Miss articles. These are long-form articles written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week, I picked Jenny's crazy project, Ask Hackaday, the $10 digital mixing desk. And I say crazy, I think Jenny thought it was a little bit crazy too. The idea is this. if you have an analog mixer, you take a bunch of different audio sources in and you combine them together. And that could be in principle as simple as like a bunch of potentiometers, but then you run into things like the potentiometers all load each other down. And so you have to have really low impedance sources. That's not going to work. So then the next level of complexity is you start putting amplifiers in there ahead to buffer the individual channels from each other. And then, real mixers have all sorts of fancy stuff. Like they'll have EQs on them so that you can, play with the treble and the bass. And then, maybe you want effects sends and returns so that you can send it out to external audio effects and all of this. And that leaves you with buses, and it starts to get electronically fairly complicated fairly fast. And Jenny's idea here is, let's just get it all into digital on the cheap if we can, and then, handle all of that extra stuff in math. There are tons of expensive, high quality audio interfaces that will take a bunch of simultaneous audio channels, digitize them, and send them across to USB. But that's not the way Jenny's going to do it. She's going to buy, a handful, this looks like 5 super cheap USB microphone adapters, plug them all into the same strip and try to get them all working at the same time in Linux. Do all the mixing and effects and everything else in software. It's a great idea. I mean, it's also kind of a crazy idea. It's almost even a stupid idea, but if you can make it work, then of course it's not a stupid idea. And I think Jenny went into this thinking, I have no idea if I'm going to be able to make this work, but it's only going to cost me $10. So what the heck, right? She, of course, runs into a whole bunch of problems and mentions them here. That's why this is an Ask Hackaday instead of a, hey, look at this awesome project that totally worked. She's at this point where it's like, oh, what am I going to do now? And it's really interesting. It's super telling about kind of the state of the Linux audio system. And she gets a lot of great help from people in the comments on that. She's also just kind of running up against the limits of USB too. Like these are 5 independent sound cards. So they're all sampling not in sync with each other. So there's definitely going to be some weird phasing problems with them being out of sync from each other. But then USB is a poled bus, right? And so the computer says, hey, do you have any data for me? Hey, do you have any data for me? Hey, do you have any data for me? Sequentially to each of these different devices. And so they're none of them synchronous, and all of them are going to have weird delays that maybe you can compensate for in software, maybe you can't. That's a cool part of the experiment. It looks like some people have even tried to do something like this before from reading through the comments. The hot tip probably looks like you could get it done with Pipewire using one of the mixer programs for that. Jonathan Bennett says that you could probably do it with either Pulse or Pipe. I don't know. It's just a crazy idea, because if it could be made to work, and, if you didn't mind the kind of crappy sound quality of the $2 USB audio converter, it could be really fun to play around with. And so we'll see how this goes. My money's on Jenny making it work.
I guess as a proof of concept, I get using the quote-unquote nasty sound cards, the cheap and nasty sound cards. She must have liked that. She used that line a couple times. But I do wonder if maybe bumping up to the slightly less cheap and nasty sound cards would have helped with some of the issues. I mean, there's got to be a middle ground, right, between the $2 one and the professional gear, which might be worth looking at. This is the closest thing to professional Linux audio I've ever done.
Right.
And I'm not doing much of it right at all. But my understanding is like there are distros geared to audio production.
Yeah.
And I think they even use like patched kernels to do stuff like you're talking about, to get like faster polling to the hardware and stuff for that reason, because you want to be able to do that as quick as possible. So, the answer could be there too, that it might need some kind of kernel patches. A lot of different options to look at. And, you mentioned Jonathan. I think he was talking about taking Jenny up on the challenge and coming up with his own version of this too, which should be interesting.
Well, that's what would be really cool about this is if, a number of the people who have some ideas in the audience get inspired to give it a try and see what you can do. I mean, you're definitely right. There are non-hacky solutions to this, but the challenge of hacking this together, I think, is half the fun.
It's one of them things I guess you don't know until you try. Like if you had asked me, I would be like, yeah, sure, just put a bunch of sound cards on there and it'll be fine.
If you'd asked me, I would have said that's a dumb idea. But if she makes it work, then it's a smart idea.
All right, well, my can't miss this week comes from Lewin Day, and this is smart ovens are doing dumb checks for internet connectivity. And you can kind of get the whole thing from the title, because if you're like me, and probably are if you're listening to this, you might be wondering, why does the oven need to check for the internet? Like, first off, that's the first thing. And, most of the comments are along the same thing. Why does the oven need to check for the internet? But we'll get to that in a minute. I think anybody who's probably worked with computers long enough has been like, oh, is the internet down? Let me try to go to Google, right? Because Google is eternal. And if Google's down, it's a bad day. And it's, if you can't get to Google, it's far more likely something's wrong on your end. Everybody, we've all done that. Anyone who's ever worked IT or whatever. These smart ovens basically are doing the same thing. They need to know for whatever their connectivity purposes are. They need to know if they're on the internet. So they just start pinging Google every 5 minutes to see if it's connected up. In looking at the traffic sending these things out, they also ping like Yandex and Baidu and these Russian Chinese sites. They're kind of getting the whole globe covered. And if you're somebody who's got, your Pi-hole set up or whatever, and you start seeing the kitchen appliances talking to a Russian website, you might naturally be a little concerned about what's going on. So that's kind of the origins of this story. People start seeing these weird connections and thought, these things getting remote commands or something. And looking a little deeper into it, it seems innocent enough. It literally is just pinging these sites like you would do if you're trying to see if your computer had the internet up. So there's probably nothing evil in this case, although it's good. It's always good to check if your kitchen appliances are doing anything evil behind your back. But in the comments, it did start a much larger discussion, like I said, about like why do we have ovens that are connected to the internet, and do we need to add connectivity to everything? And I think the answer is that you're going to get it whether you want it or not, because it's so cheap now. And we know this. I mean, we work with $5 microcontrollers that have Wi-Fi all day. And that's at our cost, right? It's so cheap to add Wi-Fi to something that even if it provides like a fringe benefit, and even to provide more than a fringe benefit, if it provides them with analytics and stuff that they can somehow spin off to sell into somebody, it's certainly worth it. So yeah, of course they're going to put these things in there, and they're going to come up with any kind of reason they can to justify it. So I like this as it kind of got the discussion going. As a technical thing, it's fairly straightforward. They just sniffed the connections and saw, okay, it's just ICMP ping. It's nothing to be worried about. But it's interesting that we even have to be worried about what messages our oven is sending to Russia.
Yeah, the comments I liked here are like, why don't they ping AEG? That's the company that made it. Why don't they ping AEG's website? They should be able to hit that. But I think maybe that is part of it, that they don't know what region this is going to be sold in, and they really just want to kind of hedge their bets, right? Like, they're hitting Google, Yandex, and Baidu. They're like, if this gets sold in
so wherever you are,
this gets sold in China, at least that one will get through. If this gets sold in Russia, at least that one will get through. They've got their bases covered, and so you kind of got to give them a little credit for that.
I suppose. I did like the one comment. They said, well, I always use Hackaday to test if my internet's working, which I thought was nice, because we're, for the most part, work.
Thank you.
The other kind of aspect I liked about this one, I thought good to get discussion going. This is not a problem that is unique to kitchen appliances. Like, you might have your own project, right, that you want to You wanted
Sure.
to see, do I have a live internet connection? So, I thought it was kind of cool in the comments, people brainstorming different approaches other than just the classic hit Google. Somebody said, just check the NTP time, right? Like if you can't connect to the NTP server, there's probably a pretty good chance you don't have an internet connection because the NTP servers are up all the time too. And it's a 2-for-1, right? You're seeing if you're online and you're getting the time synchronized, which you probably need to do anyway. So I think that for my own purposes,
That's
I'll
pretty
kind of
good.
keep that filed away as a little twofer that prevents these kind of issues and is a practical benefit.
That wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to see the links or have any comments on the show, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And as Dean Segovis would say,
keep on hacking.
Hackaday Berlin. Everybody has different siren preferences.
I suppose that's true. I never really thought about it. Bye. Oh, yeah, this one's cool. I like this. I even halfway segue, too.
Here comes the wrath of Elliot. Roar! Yeah, we should.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
On that one.
totally. I have nothing to add to that. That's perfect.